Hello, and welcome to the EDM Council and Data Dynamics webinar titled In the Cloud, Make the Data Rain. Mike Merton, co-founder and COO of the EDM Council, will be kicking off the presentation. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Yolan, and thank you for everyone joining today. So why are we all here? New technologies and the digital ecosystem are causing the volume of enterprise data to grow at an exponential rate. And to top it all off, based on research from groups like Gartner, recent findings show that 80 to 90% of this growing data is actually unstructured. And to manage this mass of structured and unstructured data effectively, it's imperative to have a digital-first strategy that can help an organization understand, analyze, and maximize the intelligence from it. One of the most effective ways to optimize enterprise data is to store and leverage it on the cloud. This webinar is going to explore why cloud adoption is increasing and how it can assist an organization in becoming digital first. We will also discuss an exciting real-world use case on how the cloud has helped the clean energy sector achieve net zero emission goals while driving digital transformation. And we'll be joined by Nanda from British Petroleum, and also how in working with Data Dynamics based on the EDM Council's Cloud CDMC framework, this has helped BP realize cloud technology at its full potential. So with no further ado, let me go about the business of introducing our first panelist and speaker, which is Piyush from our partner firm, Data Dynamics. So Piyush, over to you to sort of set context on, hey, what's happening in cloud and why is all of this coming together at this point?
So thanks, Mike, for having us on. Look forward to the dialogue. You know, when we think about cloud adoption, one of the key questions really becomes, the word cloud is synonymous nowadays to how organizations leverage technology to have a competitive differentiator. The question really becomes, what is it about the cloud that's really generating that differentiator? Clearly, agility, flexibility, ease of use, ease of spinning up, at least from an infrastructure standpoint, all come to mind. When you think about, you know, by 2025, over 100 zettabytes of data are going to be stored in the cloud. That's literally around the corner. You're talking in the next 3 years. And we are seeing that continue to accelerate quarter over quarter and year over year. You're also seeing that the burst capability the cloud offers, especially when you're trying to mine the level of data, the context of the data, the size of the data that continues to grow, becomes an extremely important facet of why the cloud becomes valuable, because your burst strategy gives you that flexibility. In addition, there used to be a very strong belief that is the cloud secure? And what you're finding is actually the cloud, according to most enterprises, 81% of them, believe that not only were they able to innovate more quickly, 94% found that their online security was far more secure. Because of the scale, the capabilities, these cloud providers have really matured on their ability to ensure protection for their customers. And then when you think about, do they trust the cloud? You see more and more end users, lines of businesses engage in leveraging the cloud because of everything I mentioned, from ease of use, ease of access, flexibility, and to some extent, cost savings. And then as you see, the continuous growth in spending with the public cloud providers and the hyperscalers continues to grow to over $482 billion just this year alone. So, you know, we believe that the cloud is still in a journey, and there is a transition continuing to be taken place within enterprise customers as they go around this opportunity to make sure that they are transforming to a true digital entity. You know, the question then becomes, how does the cloud help an organization accelerate in digital first journey? And that's a really interesting conversation, because in most cases, we think about cloud in terms of infrastructure and how you can leverage that infrastructure from a tech standpoint. But the real truth is you're leveraging the cloud for business outcomes. What we are finding is the data that gets processed in the cloud allows customers to be far more competitively positioned, to be able to react far more quickly because of the processing powers, because of the centralization of the data, as well as being able to share and distribute that information in a secure manner to constituents as and when required. And if you think about digitalization and a path, and Nanda will be able to share more on BP's journey towards the digital future, you see that every vertical is taking massive steps in driving cloud adoption as a means to increase their digital competitiveness. So with that, I think, Mike, it's time for a poll.
Well, it's a great way to kick off getting our audience engaged into this discussion. So let's get our first poll question up on our screens. And let me phrase it for everyone. Hopefully everyone else sees the pop-up, which is, what is the most common challenge faced with cloud adoption? And this is multiple choice. You can click more than one of these so we can get a sense of what the drivers are. Is it the shortage of personnel with cloud expertise, the sheer sprawl of data in the existing environment, no visibility into the content and context of the data, just the overall migration of data into the cloud, or is it data security and compliance issues? Or yes, you can pick the all of the above. But put the ones you think are the most impactful as being blockers with cloud adoption in your organization. And we'll give it a moment. Piyush, before we rock and roll with the rest of the discussion here, it would be good to get some comments on what we see are the challenges that are driving these issues.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I look at these, I think I can resonate with almost every one of them with our enterprise customers. And depending on where you are in your journey, some of these may be truly standing out as things that you are facing today in terms of challenge, whether it be personnel shortages, whether it be the sheer size of data sets. We're now in the exabyte era. You're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of petabytes in some cases. Just sheer understanding of where it exists and what's within it. Migration of data clearly becomes a major challenge. We have found statistically from cloud providers that 1 in 2 cloud adoptions get delayed because of the data migration to the cloud. 1 in 2 get stalled and delayed, which impacts the digital strategy and impacts the ability to leverage the cloud. So it's an interesting one. And then security. So we'd love to see what you guys think.
Well, okay. Here we go. Here are the real-time answers, and coming in at number 1 with 46% responding to this is it's the shortage of personnel with cloud expertise. And then right behind that, number 2 at 42% are challenges with migration of data into the cloud. And number 3 is just the sheer sprawl of data in the existing environment. So Piyush, is this a surprise or what you expected? What would you draw from this? Because it looks like these all are pretty impactful. Not one of them is overwhelmingly the choice.
Absolutely. I think, not really surprising, because as I stated, I could resonate with each and every one, knowing our enterprise customers and what they face, and they would probably tick mark each and every one of these. And I think, when you think of personnel shortages, we're all seeing a massive churn in resources taking place. The Great Resignation continues to be the big focus for companies in how they retain and manage, recruit resources, and especially with the expertise on cloud nativity, as well as understanding localization of infrastructure, applications, data, and then how does that tie to the hyperscalers is obviously something that we see as a big void out there. I'm guessing, Mike, from your standpoint, you hear the same things from the folks in the
usually the comment is you mentioned early on, it's somewhat dependent upon where a company is in their journey, where you see some of these responses more prevalent if people are earlier in their life cycle. But I think all of these are some of the major blockers overall. And by the way, I'd like to now introduce Nanda to the discussion. Nanda, welcome to today's webinar. And we're really happy to have you. In fact, Piyush, it would be awesome if this is the right time to give Nanda an opportunity to describe what's been going on at British Petroleum. And Nanda, my understanding is that you've embarked on a very important cloud journey, but you're also looking at this as an enablement of your ESG and sustainability objectives of net zero, either carbon footprint and opportunities with BP. So this is really a very exciting journey. And I think the audience here would love to hear about what has happened and what are some of the lessons learned. It's really going to add to this discussion to hear that real world scenario at your organization.
Sure. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Piyush. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah, you're coming in good.
Okay, great. Real quick, firstly, apologies about the technology issues. Looks like I'm not a very Zoom-friendly panelist. I'm, I don't know if you already spoke about this, but so as the Chief Architect for Digital Foundations at BP, my accountability is primarily to drive the cloud adoption, cloud transformation for BP, which is essentially one of our underpinning objectives alongside of digital transformation as an organization. I don't know how many of the attendees are familiar with the BP reInvent that kicked off at the beginning of last year. One of the big statements we made then was that BP will aim to become a net zero in terms of carbon emissions by 2050. And what this means is that we have to obviously take actions, as much on the business front as we do on the digital front as well. Cloud transformation is something that we've been doing for a good 6 years now. I think we are probably the most advanced in terms of pure numbers in the energy industry, I believe. I mean, you guys probably know the market better. And we are at a point where we are now looking at the cloud to enable this decarbonization to some extent, right? So as an example, we are looking at more and more cloud native type technologies. So for example, even looking at, we use, of course, a bunch of the data dynamics products as well to be able to move our data from traditional on-premise type storage appliances to the cloud, to multiple destinations, both on Azure and AWS. And we're actually now beginning to look at even moving, even within the cloud, from a let's say, more expensive, more carbon intensive type infrastructure over to more cloud native type services. So again, back to BP's overall journey, just some numbers really, just for everyone's awareness. We are at about 81% in terms of our overall footprint in the cloud, meaning 80%, 81% of our entire digital footprint is in the cloud. We're, as I said earlier, we're at a point where we're now beginning to look at how to do even better in the cloud. We are past the point of looking at cloud being the cloud first type approach. I was looking at the other the poll, I think, and I as did Piyush, I also could relate to some of those factors. The big, what did you call, the great resignation, I think it's called, is definitely impacting us. It's the way it is impacting us is sort of interesting in that because we've started this journey several years ago, we actually do have a very strong, deep technical expertise within the organization as far as cloud technologies are concerned. So we are actually now seeing that some of the talent is getting attracted to other organizations. We're seeing an interesting dynamic there, being one of the earliest adopters, at least at the enterprise level. Well, I don't want to talk through every single one of these, bullets here, but as you can see, our overall strategy, which includes, very rigorous and robust drive to adopt cloud, has definitely given us a lot of benefits. We are constantly tracking and working with the cloud providers in terms of the carbon emissions figures, where we believe that we have a significant presence with some of the suppliers. We're actually having conversations about how we can optimize those workloads better. Data is an extremely important part of this, as one can imagine. We've always said within BP that, when you start looking at applications, you should assume that data goes with it, because they need to coexist, obviously. But then even without the application-related data, there's a significant amount of unstructured data that is also, it has huge presence in, in our what we call the on-premise world, which also needs to move to more optimized storage services in the cloud. And I'll pause there for any questions, comments, or any other questions you may have, Mike.
Well, I think, Nanda, first of all, as I glance through these 9 items listed, kudos to BP, because there are many different ways the company is seeking to support improvement in sustainability and improvement by actually measuring things that will impact the environment in a positive way. And so that's great to see. You've mentioned, did I get it correct that the statistic you shared is a relatively high percentage of BP's operations are now operating in the cloud? Do you mind giving us a sense, because everyone's on that journey, most companies are at least, is there an approximation of what percentage of BP today is cloud operational, which obviously then gives the gap of what might still remain, and just so that the audience has a sense of where you are in that journey?
That is that 80% that I referred to.
Wow. Okay.
As unbelievable as it may be, we are 80% in the cloud. So just to give maybe a little bit of insight into how and why we got there.
Right.
When we first announced the cloud first strategy in 2016, if I'm recalling it correctly, what we said clearly is that any application that is new, or data for that matter, will go into the cloud, and if not, you need an exception that needs to be approved from the highest authority within that portfolio, right? In our case, we actually said the vice president of that portfolio must approve if you want to put even one server in one of your data centers. Now, alongside that, what we also said is that every single time we have the opportunity to touch, to do anything with our existing applications that are in our data centers, we use it as an opportunity to migrate to the cloud. And that has helped us, get to where we are today. We've got a huge, data center presence, as one might imagine, for the size of BP. Out of our, we had about 8 what we call mega data centers, 2 in Houston, 2 in Chicago, 2 in London, 2 in Singapore. We actually now have only the London ones and the Chicago ones. We've actually restacked the Chicago, but basically we've got only London and Chicago to do now. Singapore and Houston are actually shut down thanks to the cloud transformation program.
So it's been, so first of all, the journey, if you add it up today, is somewhere in the 6 years into it. And for 6 years, you've had a decree from the top, is what I'm hearing, that said, anything we do going forward should have an eye on being implemented in the cloud. And anytime we're working with anything that's on our on-prem or legacy environment, we should be seeking ways to move that into the cloud as well. And here you are at the 80% ranking, which, by the way, one of the vicarious statistics I've heard, if you go all industries across the world, today somewhere in the order of only 5% of the available compute is being executed, stored in cloud, which means 95% still hasn't moved. So if I compare where you are at BP, you're way down the road. You're where many companies want to be, which to me, I sort of like this. It's that chance to say, Okay, now this journey wasn't a smooth line. There were a lot of lessons learned along the way that allow you now to present these results. And to me, that's the heart of what I think this audience wants to hear. Because if you've learned those lessons and they can be shared with this team, and we get help from, of course, great partner companies like Data Dynamics, then this journey can be a little bit easier for the next company wanting to hear and get to that point as well. So, you know, with that backdrop, I think that's what we're now going to be pivoting our discussion to. Now, Piyush, I'm going to ask, is this a good time to do another poll question?
Sure. I think it's a perfect time to engage the audience and get their feedback.
Okay, so we're going to get another question up on the screen, poll number 2. And by the way, once you answer the poll question in front of you, please, if you have any questions, put them right into chat. We're going to do as many as we can during this discussion. And we promise that everyone will get a written response if for some reason we can't cover your question today. So onto the poll. What aspects of cloud derive the greatest value as part of your digital transformation? This is also multiple choice. You can choose ease to start building out new applications, centralized repositories for smarter data mining, archival storage and cost savings, access to tools and an ecosystem for greater value, business continuity, disaster recovery. I would pick the 1 or 2 that you think are the most important, unless you think all of these, either by decree or from your observation, are applicable for your company. And we'll give it a moment and get the answers.
So while
by the
we're...
way, go ahead, I'm sorry, Piyush.
No, I said while we're waiting, Mike, it would be good, Nanda, a follow-on question to Mike's questions, and the fact that, first of all, kudos to you and BP for recognizing the value of the cloud and starting so early. I know for us, in terms of our customer base, you're definitely one of the bleeding edge enterprise customers on that journey. And so the question I guess I would ask while we're waiting on the poll question is, from a line of business and actual business users that are leveraging the cloud now that you are, let's say, 80% there, are they seeing a difference? Are they seeing a delta where, you know, they're valuing the fact that you have decided to go on that journey as a key aspect to your digital strategy?
100%. So there's a couple of things that I think that do play into this. And cloud, as much as the technology foundation was very key to it, I think our adoption of modern ways of working, agile, DevOps, all of these had to come together for that to work. So as we kept claiming that, hey, you can now deploy a server in 10 minutes as opposed to 6 weeks, the immediate question was, yeah, but we actually are not ready to operate that quick, right? We're actually, you know, our processes are designed to be 6 weeks average speed. So I think that it was very important for us to have the modernization of our ways of working alongside the adoption of cloud. That was very important for us to do. Do the businesses see the benefit? Absolutely. And I think what we've also learned over the years is to take the platform approach. So when we now deliver something, we don't necessarily have a centralized team trying to do everything for the customer. And in this context, the customer is the business, right? Okay. It's not a case of, hey, raise a ticket to create the next VM. We've actually delegated permissions within the context of some security parameters for them to be able to do so themselves. And this is, you know, of the many challenges we've had over the years, to be able to give them that delegation has been probably one of our biggest achievements, because that allowed that removal of dependency on any centralized shared services teams, which frankly, you know, I hope a lot of our attendees would agree, does slow things down.
Yep.
But we definitely tried to you know, make that difference in that whole deployment space. And finally, when it comes to adoption of technology, one of the things that we have often seen is that as much as we may have these very savvy digital teams at the center, often the business perspective is very much driven through, you know, their requirements, and therefore, in a lot of cases, we found that they are looking at technologies that we haven't yet enabled. right? So as an example, you might actually remember this, Piyush, when we first looked at Azure NetApp files, as well as CVO. We said, okay, we can enable this service, but it's going to take us 6 months. But the business said, sorry, we have a week to show the business, right? And this is when, again, with the help of tools such as StorageX, we were actually able to demonstrate that we were able to quickly respond to a demand such as this. Now, I think the key message there, though, is instead of trying to do everything centrally, when you delegate that responsibility, it's a lot easier for the businesses to move forward. So we created what we call the innovation type space, where they have very little security controls, very little challenge when it comes to any policy restrictions, where they can go and just try out new tech, and that has also hugely helped.
So Nanda, my takeaway is that one of the big lessons you've learned at BP, and obviously the best testimony is 80% of your business is running on cloud. So you had to figure this out to scale it to that size. You've tried to steer away from mandating that everything must go through a centralized support group. And instead you have federated the access to business to drive their own, essentially self-service to some degree, to leverage this skill to themselves, teach the person how to fish, have them fish inside of the cloud environment and get their own answers. And I'm also hearing that you've created an innovation zone, for lack of a better description, that allows the business to try out different experiments and ideas on how to leverage this as well. That also sounds to me to some degree of self-service empowerment to your business to innovate. Of course, they'll need guidance if there's a brand new tool or capability, but you're giving that exploration capability as well. So awesome, absolutely. That's good. By the way, we did get poll results. Let me bring them up and get some comments from both of you. Number one is that as far as bringing the greatest value, is that the cloud represents a centralized repository or repositories for smarter data mining. And over half of our audience picked that. And sort of many of the rest are close to being tied, but of course, ease to start building out new applications. And of course, the cost savings and archival storage savings that cloud can bring. Any reaction to that, Nanda? You've been on the front line, and then Piyush, certainly welcome you chiming in on these poll results.
Yeah, so I definitely can relate to it. I mean, clearly the centralized repositories for smarter data mining, that is very interesting. We actually did something very sort of similar to that general principle. We've got the idea of the data lakes, both in Azure and AWS, which is where the bulk of our workloads are. And that allows us to do a lot of visualization and analytics on top of it. It kind of relates also to the question on the chat window from, I believe, Andy Henderson, and talking about whether or not we used native platforms like Redshift, Synapse, or so on. I can tell you, Andy, that if there's a technology out there, BP has used it. But on a serious note, Redshift, yes, we have, and Databricks, yes, we have. We're still just playing with the idea of Snowflake. We're not at a point where we are adopting it at scale. But coming back to this poll, Mike, just looking at things like archival storage and cost savings, that's a big one for us, right? Because the cloud gives you the flexibility of being able to move data between various tiers, and therefore allowing you to prioritize what needs to be readily available versus what can sit in the freezer to be accessed only once every 6 months, for example. Again, honestly, when I looked at the poll, I was expecting all of the above to show up as the highest percentage, because I can see that every one of these is very important. Business continuity and disaster recovery. I think one of the points that was mentioned at the start, I think maybe by Piyush, was about the reliance on the cloud from a security and compliance standpoint, we were at a point where we were not sure if we can trust the cloud without data, right? But as we did more and more work, it emerged that actually the cloud has better controls and security as long as you manage it well, right? In order to be able to provide this business continuity in the cloud.
So Nanda, you actually raise an interesting point. And by the way, compliments to our audience because we're getting a lot of questions, so keep them coming. But I'd like to pivot to a point, and Piyush, if you could help, which is how has data dynamics helped BP realize the full potential of cloud technology? And I think from that, then you also will help our audience, and I'll chime in on some of the resources that the council also has available in the form of the cloud CDMC framework. So Piyush, over to you to give the audience some insight on how you've helped the BP journey.
Sure. So to that context, I think one thing I'll just mention on the poll results on the leveraging of smarter data mining capabilities through a central repository. One of the biggest shifts and movements from a data mobility standpoint we're seeing is isolated Hadoop data lakes being centralized into a central repository, whether it be on Amazon or whether it be in Azure or whether it be in Google, as the three larger hyperscalers. And we're seeing a lot of collaborative effort to say, hey, let's remove the duplication that takes place locally and use that as a mean to get more intelligence and garner more intelligence. So that's driving a lot of data mobility to the cloud. From existing workloads. So in terms of the data dynamics journey and BP, first of all, I have to truly thank Nanda. He and Keisha, who runs digital transformation at BP, have been tremendous partners in working with us, in helping us help them drive this journey. Truly, as Nanda mentioned, they are at the forefront in terms of an enterprise thinking cloud first, and ensuring that their business practices, everything from senior management down, are supporting the idea that the cloud is our future, and it's going to be a key differentiator in leveraging technology to drive business value and to move to an era of clean energy. When we looked and spoke with BP a couple of years ago, they were embarked on consolidating some of their footprints, especially from the large locations, as Nanda mentioned, massive locations in the US, massive locations in Singapore, massive locations in Europe. And the challenge became, how do you address an intelligent data migration without making it so cumbersome and so manual that you need an army of people? Traditionally, we've seen large enterprises have to bring in 30, 40 people to do a enterprise data migration. And with that comes all the challenges of onboarding. With that comes the question of resourcing, as you guys mentioned, having people that have that knowledge. And with that also comes risk, because you have a lot of manual processes, a lot of scripting being done around quote unquote data mobility tools such as rsync and robocopy. And what we were able to do with BP was to come in and really say, look, we can help you automate. And that's exactly what we did. Hundreds of terabytes to begin with were automated in terms of understanding what was at source, understanding their destination. And when I say understanding, configuring the software to understand it, and then deriving and driving policies within the software that said, if this is there, do this action. And that action then is set up in a very controlled manner in terms of data mobility. And that allowed them to move hundreds of terabytes in that initial phase in a matter of days and weeks versus months and years that typically most enterprises struggle with. As I mentioned in the beginning of this, 1 in 2 enterprises says cloud adoption is derailed due to data migration challenges. That means that that's a pretty large percentage of people that are stuck in trying to get the scale of these tens of petabytes of data out there. And we were really able to help them drive that in an automated fashion. We are helping them understand the data in terms of who owns it, where it is, what it is, and that context around, especially in the unstructured world, for those of you that have or are living the pain, is something that's hard to come by because you have multiple repositories spanned across a global footprint. You know, in BP's case, you know, Nanda has the fortune, good fortune or bad fortune, depending on the day, I guess you ask him, of tens of regional data centers, like many other energy companies, like many other enterprise companies. How do you manage understanding your data sprawl in those places? And then when you think about cloud consolidation, how do you manage and understand what that journey will take in terms of what is within that data? And can you move it? Where can you move it? And how do you help your business get that intelligence so that they can become better versed? And I think that's where we were really able to drive automation through our platform, where we could give them the metadata understanding of context and help them drive more effective and efficient enterprise data mobility to their respective cloud providers, depending on where they want it to land. So, Nanda, would you concur, or would you say?
Absolutely. To all of them, I think they're all really well put points. You know, one of the things that we've learned, as you called out at the start, is I think you said one of every two companies talk about data migration derailing cloud transformation plans or timelines. That is true in the case of BP as well, definitely in the case of our first set of data centers in Houston. We frankly underestimated what it would take to migrate the data, right? And so we picked up the activity to migrate data, especially the unstructured data, only with about 6 months left to close the data centers. And we quickly learned that just to discover where things were, you know, it would take us several months. In fact, as you will, I'm sure, remember, Piyush, that's when you came to rescue and said, hey, how about looking at Storage X? And that it really did help us do that discovery in a much more time-sensitive fashion. We did end up having to extend the timeline a little bit, but that's more because of you know, when we started. And then, you know, with the London data centers, as you know, we kicked off that activity way ahead of the exit timeline. So it's definitely a lesson learned for us.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that, you know, I would also highly recommend to everybody listening is most of the time when people think about the cloud migration journey, they're always thinking application and how do you transform applications and rewrite them to be cloud enabled. And data almost becomes a secondary thought. But reality is data is just as important to be migrated and needs to be thought through and architected in the right way. Otherwise, you end up really behind the 8 ball, especially with time commitments to exit data centers or to consolidate within the cloud.
Piyush, good dialogue with you and Nanda. One of the items that Data Dynamics has been involved in, I think has played a role in forming a framework and an approach to help companies in general accelerate trusted cloud adoption, is the work around CDMC and the Cloud Data Management Capability Framework. Do you mind just sharing how that has fit into the work at Data Dynamics? And I'll help on this with just giving the audience an understanding of how to access and what this framework can do for them. It covers many of the things right now that Nanda and you are raising, and also many of the questions I'm reading now in the chat talk to some of the things that are right now built inside of the recommended controls within the CDMC framework. So Piyush, over to you for a quick run through on that.
Sure. So for those that may not be familiar, please definitely take Mike up on understanding the fantastic framework that members of the EDM Council have contributed to put together. And what I would consider the true Bible or the true commandments to being successful in your cloud data management, and really has some great best practices. So if you've not had a chance, definitely recommend it. It's something that, you know, I refer to all the time because these are challenges that I'm sure all of you face. And it starts with understanding your constituents, understanding your data profile, understanding data lineage, understanding how and what the accessibility is, and also taking into context things like compliance and governance. And one of the things that you learn when you go on this cloud journey is it is not isolated to only a CIO organization or only a CDO organization or only a CISO organization or only a line of business. It is truly a collaborative effort. And the ones that are successful, and Nanda could attest to this, are the ones that actually can bring those constituents all together to leverage best-in-class technology. You know, from our standpoint, over 90% of the points or principles that CDMC lays out are covered through our platform. And we're very proud of that because we actually took a concerted effort to say, hey, this can't be done in isolation by just the storage team. This can't be done just in isolation by the data management team or the CDO organization. It needs to understand and involve security and the way they look at that, both locally as well as in the cloud, so that they can be futuristic in managing that better. It needs to bring in data privacy and data governance. If you look at the laws that continue to be rolled out, not just GDPR, which is very known and prevalent as a European standard in terms of data privacy, you have laws in several states that are now being enforced on the US side. You have laws in countries like Brazil in terms of data sovereignty, in Indonesia, in Korea, in India, in Russia. Well, all of those need to be taken into context. And especially as an enterprise, when you have the sprawl that you do, understanding that becomes a key aspect. The other aspect, as I mentioned in one of the, answers in the poll question, is around cost savings, right? One of the biggest things is how do you derive ROI? One is obviously the digital transformation and the ability to be faster, quicker, reactively. But the other is data lifecycle management. How do you drive tiering in an automated fashion? How do you ensure that data that is stale? I give you a statistic that we find absolutely amazing. Even in today's world, with all the tools that companies buy and all the software that they lay out, 70% of the data in enterprise environments in the unstructured world is not touched in over 3 years, which means most of the time it gets created, stored, replicated, backed up, archived. So you have 4, 5, 6 copies of it, if not more, but not used, which means you're not effectively getting value out of that. How do you understand that? How do you better extract value? And for that you don't want to necessarily or need to utilize, how do you ensure retention standards are set so that you drive efficiency and have a governance process that derives cleanup to avoid exposure? So when you look at data dynamics, we've actually built out a software platform that starts with analytics, helping you understand your data, the ownership, the type, the size, the age of your unstructured data. From that, it adds contextual knowledge into what is within the data. Do I have personal information? And if I do, does A, C, and D of that personal information, I'll give you a simple example. Does a name alone mean anything? Or does a name along with a social security number and a date of birth have far more value? And then what can I do that's actionable to protect it? Can I remove security permissions? Can I keep an immutable log where every time that file or those folders are touched, I know who has accessed them, and that can be used to report on, that can be used for audit trails, it can be regulatory reporting, external as well as how do I drive data mobility that's intelligent, that's leveraging all of this contextual knowledge to make sure that I am efficient and effective. So, we've had the privilege and opportunity to work with 26 of the Fortune 100. So we really do understand enterprise customers extremely well, having touched hundreds of petabytes and continue to do so. And I think that's something that's important. And the final thing I will mention is, especially as we get into a macro environment where you are seeing companies looking to be more efficient and effective in a potential recessionary period that may be coming up, having ROIs that are from your investment and being able to drive cost savings becomes an extremely interesting and important aspect. And that's something we've delivered to every single customer that we work with. So it's something that definitely we take pride in.
So Piyush, thank you for that understanding. And for the audience that may not be familiar with CDMC, the acronym stands for Cloud Data Management Capabilities. And on the left of the screen, you'll see a topographical picture of a cloud, and then the 6 key components of the framework. Underneath that, there are 14 capabilities and another 37 sub-capabilities. And how did this get built? 2 years ago, the EDM Council was approached by both cloud companies and some of the large players in the marketplace to say, can you take our challenges in a cloud, multi-cloud environment where we need data controls in the cloud? We don't want to build these all by ourselves. We don't do this as a one-off, but can we organize a global work group to assemble companies and people together to build a common framework that will allow us to essentially hyperscale our migration to cloud, but have all the right controls in place so we don't take jurisdictional or reputational risk with our data. And so this work group, we said if we could have 10 companies, let's kick it off. And to our surprise, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic with lots of people having time to jump on Zoom and web conference calls. We actually had 100 companies, 300 subject matter experts. We went through 750 meetings in over a year and a half to tackle these really important questions, many being raised on the chat box right now, to come up with a common set of guidance. And while this was being built, the council has, as part of our membership, many of the global regulators, and we would brief them and get their feedback back into the framework. And finally, September last year, we published the full framework as a free license for any company in the world to download off the EDM Council website and to use internally for your organization. Yes, there are training courses. There are companies that can do independent assessments now on this. But what we encourage everyone to do, and we've put it into chat, download the framework, because all of the things you're going to focus on for scaling your cloud environment, on your governance, your business case, your data architecture, and all of the, and we actually published 14 key controls for protecting sensitive data in a hybrid cloud environment. Now, all of this guidance is now available for your team to read and use, and you can also assess your operation to make sure these controls and the business processes are properly in place. So it's a phenomenal resource that the entire industry pulled together. By the way, the top 4 cloud companies worldwide in revenue are Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, IBM. All 4 companies were involved. They each had about 6 engineers during that 18-month period. And they've been doing with the council, which is sort of unheralded. They highly compete against each other, but they've been sitting at the table advocating this framework as a free resource for all companies to accelerate your journey for clouds. So go for it. It's there for you. If you have questions, let us know. And Piyush, compliments to you and the data dynamics team, because you've actually not only helped build the framework, but you've been cross-referencing the framework into your platform and your framework offerings so that this best practice can be scaled for companies. So with that, Nanda, I have a question that came in from Dipti, which is, in your opinion, how data governance differs for data on the cloud versus on-prem? And did BP introduce any additional data controls when data was migrated into cloud? So we've all heard about data governance for many, many years. Now we're applying this into cloud. Is it different? And did you have to put any extra controls in?
So the way I would respond to that is data governance is data governance, right? That should be driven by what you require from a business perspective, right? Whether it's on-premise or cloud, the rules of data governance wouldn't necessarily change. However, what the cloud does do is it allows for greater flexibility in terms of how you can apply greater granular control over what levels of controls you can apply. And of course, one of the most important aspects of going into the cloud is that you can automate it all, right? And that's a huge benefit that allows you to be a lot more efficient, ability to respond to an incident quickly, and the ability to, actually show the bigger picture as you move up the chain as well from a management perspective. So I think that really is what the difference is for me between cloud and on-premise. Again, if I look at the energy industry, probably not as regulated as the financial services industry, but if you look at purely from the needs of the energy industry, there's a lot of different data that is very sensitive, and frankly, we would have had a lot of those controls even when these were on premise. However, I think the key is when these were on premise, we would have probably had to go to great lengths to ensure that data is protected. I can even think about a couple of systems that actually used to sit in what we call the secret cage in one of our data centers, just to ensure better security. Now, in the world of cloud, the secret cage is a configuration item, for all we know. So I think that's the key difference for me as far as data governance goes.
Yeah, I'm hearing, Nanda, my takeaway from hearing you is that these controls can now be automated in scale. And in fact, for most of our audience, to me, it was revealing that when you look at the amount of people that Amazon, Google, Microsoft Azure put on data security for protecting zettabytes of data, their teams are bigger than the entire IT operations of any major organization. In fact, I had the CTO of Google said, we have more people working on data security than the entire IT teams of the entire financial industry that are protecting perimeters all day long. So, that worry that cloud is not reliable or it's going to be a problem in protecting sensitive data, it's the opposite. And in fact, if you build in these automations and follow the guidance of CDMC, like everything in the cloud should be cataloged and classified, because as soon as you do that, it sets up the right encryption levels. And that's one of the major guidances in the framework. You have to do that. So if companies today are implementing large-scale data lakes into cloud, but they haven't implemented a catalog and classification strategy at the same time, you're going to have an issue. And it's just a question of time. So, and these are clearly, Absolutely. It sounds like, Nanda, lessons you've learned and have applied at BP to scale to this level.
Absolutely. Just one thing I'll add to all of that, Mike, is also remember that these vendors, the cloud vendors, are building these, as you called out, to operate at scale, right? There's thousands and thousands of customers, sitting on it, and therefore, if I go into this data and say, hey, I need to have a PCI compliant environment, actually, there's a way of being able to put those controls together in a PCI compliant fashion, because it is almost pre-designed for you. Whereas if you're, in your own environment on premise or whatever, you're having to do it line by line yourself. That's a huge advantage you have by moving to the cloud.
So guys, we're approaching the top of the hour, a couple of final questions, and then I want to turn it to each of you to give a final remark and also let our audience know there's a series of resources post this webinar that we are going to share with you. So please stay on for a couple more minutes. So here's a final question. It comes from Kelly, which is, do you have any suggestions for limiting sensitive data download capabilities for users with read access, which can allow downloads depending on the cloud services, such as proactive monitoring, logging data? Do you mind just covering this question? Either Nanda, you want to start first, and Piyush, if you have thoughts on it?
Piyush, you may, if you could go first, actually.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Our way.
So, the way I would say is, first of all, I think a lot of this is configuration based on each enterprise rather than a generic way of doing it, because each enterprise, at least in our case, most companies that we engage with, are leveraging Active Directory heavily in their kind of security monitoring of access and how that access is managed, both locally as well as in the cloud. I would say that that's definitely one that we are actually working on, a few ways that you can maintain audit logs of who accessed and what they accessed, so that you do have governance around being able to report on it. But there are many ways to skin it, and I'd be happy to get into a follow-on conversation with Kelly and share far more insight.
Awesome. So final thoughts for our audience, and then we'll do some of the housekeeping on extra resources we're going to share with everyone. Nanda, do you mind going first? If you had a final thought for our audience as they head back into the day job about this discussion today, what would that be?
I would say the cloud is way more advanced than it was 6 years ago. right?
Oh, yeah.
That's where we started the journey. And the reason I bring this up is just this morning we were talking about how 6 years ago when we said cloud first, we're now actually saying cloud native first, right? We're at a point where we're moving towards the, let's get all in to the cloud, be able to use native services, because that is exactly how you can leverage the benefits of that. Now, you of course have the ability to access stuff through marketplace and things like that. So again, not going into that, but my message really would be, the closing comment would be, I can tell you that the cloud is as secure, if not more, than your on-premise environments. And two, cloud adoption with the multitudes of tools out there, including the ones from Data Dynamics, are making life a lot easier for a migration of workloads and data.
Awesome. Thank you, Nanda. Piyush, final word.
So first of all, I want to thank Nanda for the partnership. It's been phenomenal to work with, and you can see why he's the lead data architect at BP addressing these challenges. From our standpoint, what I would say is a couple of things. One, if you get a chance, we're also doing a session on June 1st with Vamshi from Azure, who runs their storage products. And it'll be interesting because we've really partnered with them to drive automated data migrations to their platforms. So if you want to hear more on how that journey with Azure works, that'd be something that you may want to join and attend. What I would say is, to Nanda's point, the maturity of the cloud and the cloud providers over the last 2-3 years has been tremendous. And the rate at which the innovation is happening is phenomenal. So when you think about the great resignation and the lack of resources, the ability to self-serve and the ability to drive workflow enabled that is cloud native allows you actually to reduce the resource requirements you need to manage what you're managing, which again is a complement to what the cloud providers offer. So definitely don't shy away from it and embrace it. If there's anything we can do to help, we'd love to do it. Yeah.
So gentlemen, thank you to both of you for your time, to the Data Dynamics team for helping out. Our audience will receive 2 emails, one today, which will be a recording. You can pass that throughout your firm and to other colleagues. Number 2, every question typed in, along with the deck of materials covered today and all the chat remarks and resources are going to be sent to you early next week, because we're going to compile all of the answers and put this as a second email. So those will be heading over to you. And I wish everyone who listened today, thank you for your time. And on behalf of all of us, have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, both.